Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Mariam Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to learn and grow together? Then let's get started. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Welcome to Episode 2 of the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Our guest today is Caroline Gurney, a professional genealogist, researcher, blogger, and speaker who runs an historical research service based in the ancient market town of Chipping Sodbury in South Gloucestershire, England. Welcome, Caroline, to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Thank you.
Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Right. I was born in England, although I've lived a lot of my life overseas in various different places in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And I currently live in a place called Chipping Sodbury in Gloucestershire, which is about 2 hours due west of London. I'm a fairly typical Brit in that I've got a mixture of English, Scottish and Irish ancestors with a little dash of German thrown in. I'm married with 2 children and a darling granddaughter and a cat. I love old houses. I live in one which is over 300 years old. But I'm also really into technology as well. Had a computer since 1982. And the kind of interesting fact about how I came into genealogy maybe is that my great-grandfather was a famous Scotland Yard detective. So I think I've got an investigation gene. For my business, it's called Historical Research Services. And I do both genealogy research, which is nationwide and indeed sometimes internationally. And also I do house histories in my local area. No two projects are really the same. But my particular emphasis is on the historical context, what I call putting the flesh on the bones to create a family history, not just a pedigree with the names and dates. And I also do quite a lot of tracing living people, what Megan Smolingat calls reverse genealogy.
Do you need to be licensed in the UK to do that kind of tracing living people?
No, you don't.
Okay. So most people come to genealogy from another profession. What were you before you became a genealogy professional?
I was a diplomat for the first 10 years of my career, serving various places at home and overseas. And then I spent 8 years doing public sector management, and I ended up on the board of a management college. I then took a career break because I had a child with special needs. And then a very unscheduled health break because I had cancer and I was off for about 10 years with the treatment and recovery process.
Given your background, when you switched to opening up your own genealogy business, what were some of the skills that you brought to your business when you started it, and how have they helped you?
I think they fall into 2 groups. There were the ones directly related to the subject matter and then those that I'd acquired through my business career, my previous career. The directly related ones, the one that's most important to me is that I actually read history at university. I have a first-class honours degree from a very good British university, and I was pretty rigorously trained in historical research. And for me, I know this might be controversial, I see genealogy as just a sub-discipline of history. And I feel you can't understand the records and the evidence without a proper knowledge of the historical background. Just to take a small example, here in the UK, when the 1901 census records were released in 2002, a lot of people were surprised to find men missing because they weren't thinking about the historical context. That was the period of the Boer War in South Africa. A lot of men were over there fighting. So that's just a tiny example. More specifically on genealogy, I've had 30 years experience now as a hobbyist and then a professional. And it started in old-style archival research. There was nothing online. They weren't online at all. And so I did it the hard way, going into archives all around the country, studying various obscure groups of records. I've also taken courses in British genealogy and a thing called paleography, which is the study of old handwriting. So I've got very wide knowledge of sources, and I can read old documents quite easily. From my educational background, I had both French and Latin, which in Britain is very useful for older documents. I was in a record office a couple of months ago, and a colleague asked me to look at a piece that she said was in Latin. When I looked at it, it was actually in Norman French, but my French from my education was sufficient to be able to make it out. So those are some of my relevant qualifications, if you like. Then from the business career, I think my government career was very important because it helped me to analyse problems, find practical solutions to problems, and to communicate clearly. I did a lot of report writing. I was running a small business at the Management College, about £2 million turnover a year, had to have people skills, did a lot of public speaking. And then finally, I guess it's personal qualities as well. I'm very enthusiastic, I'm very tenacious, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist.
Oh, you won't find too many perfectionists among genealogists, will you? My goodness. What were some of the skills that you lacked when you started your business, and how did you overcome that? Because I'm sure there's something that you didn't know how to do when you started this business where suddenly you had to do everything yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the whole area where I was clueless was in bookkeeping, accountancy, taxation. And I've been really helped by an online accountancy service, which has just made that whole area so painless for me. And it was the one thing I really dreaded. And I think the other thing was the kind of micro side of business. I had never before had to do the business of drawing up contracts, estimating my time, knowing how much to charge. I found those things really difficult to start with. I did a lot of research, because that's what I do. And the internet's a great resource, not just for genealogy. I learnt by reading. I mean, I'm not working in America, but I bought the ProGen Professional Genealogy book and read it from cover to cover. I attended webinars, and I guess the two biggest helps for me were with APG, the Association of Professional Genealogists, their webinars and the questions and answers on their mailing list, and also a private group on LinkedIn of British professional genealogists, just people working in this country. They've been a terrific help.
What is the name of that group on LinkedIn, in case anybody who's a genealogist in Britain might want to check that out?
I think it's called UK Professionals in Genealogy. I have to check that out for you, Marianne.
That's fine. So what was the absolute hardest thing about starting your genealogy business?
I think it was self-doubt and overcoming that. You can have a lot of experience as a hobbyist, but it's that thinking yourself into a different position as a professional, and I just wasn't sure about it. I had terrific support from my husband, and actually, although I'm UK-based, a lot of my friends, genealogy and professional genealogist friends in the United States, and I had a lot of support from friends and mentors in the States, one of whom, of course, was you.
You know, it's funny because when I was thinking about, when I asked you to do this interview, it took a while before I remembered way back. I remembered that email that you sent out when you asked, am I ready to become a professional? And then it was fun for me kind of to remember. And I think that's a very good example of how genealogists can seek help, because not only was that email addressed to me, but it was addressed to some very prominent, very experienced genealogists in the United States, way more prominent than myself. And they reached right back to you and supported you and helped you just because you asked.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things I love about Americans. There's no snobbishness or standoffishness, and people are friendly, willing to help and share. It's something that's in the genealogy community all around the world, of course. But I found American professionals have been important in my journey long before I decided to become a professional myself. I have a great admiration for many of them.
Well, thank you. Can you share a specific story of an obstacle that you encountered early in your career and how you worked around it?
Oh, yes. Very early on, one of my very first clients, and I was so excited to get the contact. Quite a complicated piece of work. I did a lot of preparation in terms of where we might find answers to his particular brick wall, got to the point of sending my research agreement, and he said no to the provision that copyright would be retained by me. I would retain copyright in my research report. Now, that's something that is the case in both British and, as I believe, US law. It's certainly something, if you look at the APG leaflet, Hiring a Professional, that they point out to people who are thinking of hiring a professional. But he wasn't having any of it. And I had to make a decision. Do I let this client go, or do I give way? And it was quite hard to turn down business that early on. But I stood my ground, and I used the experience to go away and immediately write a copyright section for my terms of business on my website. And now, when I'm starting work with a new client, I share my terms of business, which includes that, and I have never had another person quibble at all about copyright.
That's a really good example, and I think it's a really excellent solution. I have found as well that when you put things on your website, suddenly those, like your rates or whatever, those problems go away. Because if somebody doesn't want to pay your rates, they just don't bother calling you.
Yes.
So I'm curious, though, that client, did he want to publish a book and put it all under his name? Did he have a specific issue, or was it just the generic, he wanted to own the copyright and you didn't really actually discuss what he wanted to do with it?
I think it was the latter, because I would not stand in the way of somebody who wanted to publish my work. Indeed, I'd be delighted. And I made that clear. I just wanted to retain my right to make sure that what was published was the whole of my work, and that it didn't cast me in a bad light because it had been altered, or indeed that it wasn't passed off as someone else's work. All the reasons why we have copyright to start with. So I think it was one of those I'm paying the piper and I will call the tune attitudes.
So as things progress in your business, tell us about a moment when everything started to come together and you became really confident about where you were heading.
I think it took about 18 months. I reached a point where I had new clients and repeat clients. Indeed, I had a queue of clients. I'd got my systems worked out. I'd worked out what format I would use regularly for my research plans, for quotes, for contracts, reports, invoices. I'd been through one whole accounting cycle and I'd submitted one tax return. And I'd got sufficient work under my belt that I was able to put a nice bunch of testimonials on my website. And I think at that moment I started to relax.
What about these sort of ancillary areas of running a business, like putting up a website or dealing with social media or contacting, advertising maybe for new business? How did you approach these areas?
I already had quite a high profile as a hobbyist genealogist. I deliberately, therefore, built on that. My blog, my existing websites, my contacts on social media with quite a range of genealogists. And I actually used my name in my business because I thought it was probably the most valuable asset I had at that time. In fact, all my work really has come to me, has sought me out. I did have some good publicity from one or two early things that I did. But it's been because when you Google on my name, I'm the first 10 hits that you get on Google. And I've worked very hard on that whole search engine optimization side of things and on my profile on a variety of websites and social media.
So that's really good that when you started your business, this side of things wasn't really an issue for you because you already had experience with that. You were already doing those things.
Yes.
I think for a lot of genealogists who are starting and transitioning into an actual business where they intend to support themselves, many times they find that the social media or the website, that whole aspect is very new to them and it's an uncomfortable transition. So that's great that you had that already in place before you started. So that gave you a definite advantage moving forward. Now, when you started your business, did you have one set of services and then later you found yourself specializing or niching down into a more specific area?
When I started, my website was offering genealogy and house history, but I also offered family history photography in my local area and things like family tree design. The last two, I've never had anybody ask for it, and that's now kind of fading out into the background. And the other thing is, I think that although I took on all aspects of the work that I was asked to do, I'm really focusing more and more on written family histories. Quite a few of them are for special occasions, like a special birthday or a Christmas present, where I do a complete family history, just starting with the person who's employed me and going back. Hopefully, in most cases with British genealogy, you can get back to the late 18th century with no real trouble. And it's not just the names and the people, but it's also the social, historical, geographical background. I find illustrations and so forth. And that's what I really enjoy doing. And a kind of in parallel with that are the house histories. I find them equally fascinating because they're a combination of researching the house, architecture, the people who've lived there. And of course, you've got several different families often with a very old house. So that's something similar. I like to put together, a presentation, if you like, of the work. And then quite separate from that is the work I've done on tracing living people.
When you trace living people, are you providing contact information to a client? Just saying, okay, the person is here and that's where you can contact them? I'm not quite sure
Yes.
what you need to do with that.
Yeah, I make it clear on my website that I won't trace the adoptive parents or adoptive family, the birth family of people who've been adopted. That's because there are so many emotions involved in it that I think that's best for specialists to do that, who've had training in what happens when you finally bring people together. But I will trace where people have lost touch with a relative, which is a rather easier emotional situation. I had a case just recently with a lady who wanted to trace a cousin that she knew about but had never met. And these were ladies past retirement age. And it was a problem in that, different from the usual situation, she knew both the names of the parents and the date of their marriage. She had their marriage certificate, but didn't know the name of the child. Normally we start with the name of the child and have to find the parents. And in that case, as for many of these, I worked backwards. I actually took the mother's family and worked on that. And by doing the whole fans, friends, associates, neighbours, I was able to then trace the family back down to today. And it was a real joy. I had an email a couple of weeks ago from my client to say they'd met up, they'd got on fantastically well, and they're now, really getting to know each other as a family.
Do you ever encounter a situation where you might find somebody for a client and the client tries to contact them and they don't want to be in touch?
Yes, I've got one of those on them at the moment as well. Funny enough, to do with a house history. So there's actually no family link, but my client really wants to find old pictures and photographs of the house. And I've traced descendants of the people who lived in the house around the turn of between the 19th and 20th century. They were there in the 1901 and 1911 censuses. And that was difficult, very common names, and it's taken me a long time. Finally found somebody and have written to them and had no reply. And that's quite difficult, hard for the client to face that rejection.
I would think in a house history situation, people would be more open, more receptive to contact. But, oh well.
I was surprised. In general, people are very positive and very helpful. I think there's so much knowledge now of family history from programs like Who Do You Think You Are, that they're more used to, strangers contacting you out of the blue.
Let's talk about Who Do You Think You Are for a moment. Have you been to the live conference in London?
I have been to one a couple of years back. I'm a bit allergic to London, except for research. Having lived there for many years, I like being out in the country now. So it's interesting, really. From a professional point of view, I don't particularly find it something that I get a huge amount out of. So I tend not to. I think American friends are much more into conferences than we are here, although I love going on genealogy cruises, and I have been on several of those.
Well, I'm just wondering if the general population in Great Britain has a greater awareness of genealogy and family history because of the TV show Who Do You Think You Are, as well as, this massive conference that you have in London.
I think the conference is really only on the radar of people who are already into it as a hobby.
Okay.
And it is very busy, and there's a lot going on. And in a way, you find out more about a society from looking at their website than trying to compete with somebody else to talk for 5 minutes. So I'm not sure. I mean, that's one of the things with me. I feel that, how is the best way that you learn? But I think that the TV programs definitely have had an impact. A lot more people are aware. And when I tell people what I do, they're actually very fascinated by it.
Now, in the very beginning, when you were talking about your genealogy business, you talked a bit about some of the education that you had gotten to help you get where you are now. I want to talk about house histories just because that's a little bit different. Is there anything different that you had to do to educate yourself so that you could do what you felt was a really good job providing house history reports?
A lot of the sources are similar, but there were certainly ones that were new to me and I needed to learn about. I started, as I almost always do, by reading books. I bought the 3 or 4 best-known books for this subject and read them from cover to cover, made notes of new sources to me, things I needed to know. I also looked at a lot of websites. There's a lot of very interesting websites about period properties in this country. It helped that I already own one myself, which I was in the middle of restoring. So I'd been working with architects, and just from my background as a historian, I've got quite a lot of knowledge about architectural styles and periods of building, dating buildings, that kind of thing. So I'm very much working on the historical side of house histories rather than the architectural side at the moment. I would bring in architecture colleagues, I think, if they really wanted something that detailed. Say if you were dealing with a medieval building, you needed to date things. And then I learn a lot by doing. I'm one of those people, that's my preferred mode. So working on particular projects for clients, I've made a point of learning what each record office in the locality has in the way of house history. On my website, I actually have a kind of list of resources and research links, and I have a house history category, and under that I've got links to each of the local record offices and all the material that they have, so that for each one I know exactly where to go for the particular materials that I need.
Now, many genealogists offer a wide array of services such as writing and speaking, as well as client reports. How did you determine what services you wanted to offer to grow your business? And did you change? Did you offer some services at the beginning and then you said, that's not for me, I'm going in a different direction?
Yeah, I think it's really what I said before, that to start with, if a client asked me to do work, I did it because it was work. And through that, I've gradually learnt what I enjoy and also what my strengths are. And I think because of my background as a historian, I think it's doing that broader historical research. I'm not really terribly interested in just producing a pedigree for somebody. I want to do a family history rather than a family tree. Also, I enjoy the kind of investigative sleuthing side. My least favourite thing is going to a record office just to do a set of lookups. I prefer the brick wall, the having to think laterally, creative research, if you like. So that's more and more how I'm focusing.
Do you do any public speaking or writing for journals or anything like that?
I'm, at the moment, working on a couple of articles for journals. I haven't yet had anything published. I'm also actually working on a book, but maybe come to that later.
Great.
I do public speaking, and I did it when I was a hobbyist. I made a decision not to charge for that aspect of my business. Because of my experience with cancer, I do it as voluntary work in return for a donation to cancer charity. And I do quite a lot of speaking now.
Wow, that's great. I love that approach. It's really nice. How do you balance paid work versus volunteering? And I'm not familiar at all with how volunteering to the genealogical community works in the UK. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. But do you struggle with that at all?
No, not now. I mean, I think I built my reputation as a hobbyist in genealogy through volunteering. That's how I first got invited to speak, because I was working with family history societies. Because of my health problems, I had to withdraw from all of that for quite a long period, during which we also moved house several hundred miles. So now I focus on two areas. One is the speaking for charity, which is generally an evening thing. And the other is I run a website. I run what we call a one-place study, which is a genealogy website for the market town where I live, Chipping Sodbury, and a group of about 10 parishes in the local area around. And that is easy to fit around because it's something I can work on in the evenings, weekends, downtime. I don't have to be in a particular place at a particular time. And I can respond to people's queries on the website, again, in between work that I'm doing. So, and the two things, obviously, one helps to grow my reputation and my knowledge in the local area, and the other, the speaking, has directly led to people in the audience coming to me for work as clients.
Oh, that's excellent. Good. What is the most fun project that you've ever worked on that you're able to share with us?
Oh, well, that has to be the Cutty Sark. I was just so fortunate to be given that project to do. I don't know whether everyone worldwide listening to you will know. She's a famous clipper ship, started off in the tea trade to China, but really made her name in the wool trade with Australia in the latter part of the 19th century. And she is now moored in London on the River Thames at Greenwich. There was a disastrous fire a few years ago, and she was reopened last year in the spring by the Queen. And as part of the celebrations around that, one of the corporate sponsors wanted to hold a reception on board the ship for descendants of the crew and the builders and others who'd been associated. And I got that project. It started with them asking, can you find us 20 or 30? And it grew. I ended up tracing over 600 living descendants of the crew, of whom 170 came together for the reception. I wrote biographies of all the ancestors, short pieces, which were put together in a booklet for them. And since then, that's led to me being asked to research for and appear in a BBC documentary about the ship, which is going to be shown next year. And I'm also now writing a book about crew.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that you're writing a book about that. I've actually been on the Cutty Sark because I did a study abroad in London.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, that's so cool. Oh, that's going to be great to read.
Some fascinating stories came out of it. And that's how I got into tracing living people, really, because there was quite a lot of newspaper coverage. And it's amazing to me, even today, how many queries I get from people who maybe cut out the article from the newspaper and put it away. And now, a couple of years on, they're bringing it out and saying, can you trace someone for me?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. There's a lesson in there for everyone who's listening. I'll just leave it at that, let you figure that one out on your own. But that's awesome. Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
Hello. This is Kimberly Powell, President-elect of the Association of Professional Genealogists. APG is an international membership organization dedicated to supporting all individuals in the business of genealogy, whether you're an archivist, librarian, educator, writer, or researcher. Our 2,600 members include genealogists at all stages of their professional careers, from those just starting out to some of the field's most renowned leaders. Learn how to grow your business and network with other professionals through our educational webinars, informal mentoring groups, active discussion lists, the APG Quarterly, and our annual Professional Management Conference. Visit us online at apgen.org to learn how we can help you on your professional journey and how you can help us advance public awareness and understanding of the profession of genealogy.
All right, now we are going to embark on the lightning round, where I'm going to bombard you with a bunch of questions, and you're going to come back with some answers that are going to help all the transitional genealogists in our audience, maybe help them on their way to becoming better genealogists. So here's the first one. What was the one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
Not having any clients. And in fact, I've never been without one since I started.
Was it not being afraid of having any clients or not being afraid of having any money?
No, the clients.
Okay. What was the best advice you've ever received?
It came from Marion Pierre-Louis. As soon as you accept money, you're a professional.
Did I say that?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds like something I would say, but just making sure.
Yeah, it really helped me overcome the self-doubt.
Yeah. It's just coming back to me now. Okay. Yeah. What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
Join APG, the Association of Professional Genealogists.
Okay. Do you have a productivity tool like a Dropbox that you love that you can share with our audience?
Yes, my online accountancy business management software. It's called Free Agent, and it's British. It's fantastically user-friendly and a great price.
Okay, and I will get that URL from you so that I can put that in the show notes. So that is that a product just for people who are in the UK?
No, it's used by Americans as well.
Oh, okay.
It has an international aspect as well as a British one.
Okay, great. If you can recommend one book for our listeners, and it can be any book, it doesn't have to be genealogy, it doesn't have to be business, it can be anything, what would it be?
For UK genealogy research, it has to be a book called Ancestral Trails, The Complete Guide to British Genealogy and Family History. It's by a man called Mark D. Herber, who's a fellow of the Society of Genealogists.
Excellent. All right, hypothetical scenario. You have to move across the country, or maybe even across the continent in your case. You don't know anyone, and you're not familiar with the research and record groups in that new location. What are you going to do in the first month to hit the ground running and start a new genealogy business?
First off, the local archives. Get to know them, what they contain. Make friends with the archivists. Leave your business cards in the tea room. Join the local family history society. Volunteer. Get on the speakers list. Do things locally to get clients. Offer prizes of free research for a local charity auction. Put a poster in your window in the shops. Write for a local newspaper. And then online, set up a website, write a blog, tweet your new discoveries.
Excellent suggestions. All right, give our audience one parting piece of advice and then tell us how we can get in contact with you.
My advice is that no one ever got rich working as a genealogist. Do it because you love it. Do it to the best of your ability. The clients will come and the job satisfaction will be amazing. To get in touch with me, through my website, please. There's a contact form and my email address is there. My website is www.carolinegurney.com.
Excellent. Well, Caroline, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional Podcast today. It's been wonderful.
It's been a real pleasure, Marion. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for stopping by and listening to the Genealogy Professional Podcast. There were lots of great nuggets in that interview with Caroline Gurney. Now, before you go, I've got an action item for you, something I want you to think about. Is there a question that your clients ask you over and over again? Now, go to your website and take a look at what information that you have there. Is the answer to that question missing from your website? Could you put it there? Would it be appropriate for you to address that question, which your clients keep asking you? Could you address that on your website the way Caroline did with the copyright issue? After that, why don't you head over to thegenealogyprofessional.com, leave a comment, ask a question, let us know what you're thinking. Until next week, so long.